Welcome back, learners. Ready to unlock some behavior secrets. Today, we're diving deep into applied behavior analysis, or ABA. We've got a mountain of research and notes, all thanks to you guys.
You sure do.
And expert speakers here, of course, to help us break down all this complex stuff, make it actually understandable.
Absolutely. We're going to decode the jargon and make these ADA concepts super practical.
Love it. Okay, so our research today jumps right into the core of ABA, how we make sense of behavior. It talks about these two main approaches, structural and functional.
Right.
Structural seems to be all about looking at what the behavior looks like, the form of it, and then using that to figure out, where someone's at developmentally. Reminds me of the whole object permanence thing with kids.
Yeah, good example. Like a kid searching for a toy that's hidden, the structural approach might say, oh, look, they're searching, so they must have object permanence. But it doesn't really tell us why they're searching.
Yeah, it's almost like assuming the answer's already built into the behavior.
Exactly.
And the source material points out how this can lead to some pretty circular reasoning.
For sure.
It doesn't really help us get to the root cause of why someone's doing what they're doing.
Right. And that's where the functional approach comes in. That's what ABA is all about.
Okay, so instead of getting hung up on what the behavior looks like,
right,
we're digging into its function, its purpose.
Exactly. What does it do? How does it affect the person's world?
Like, instead of just saying, okay, this kid's showing object permanence, we might ask, what has this kid learned about looking for hidden things?
Exactly.
Has searching for stuff actually helped them find it in the past?
Right. And if it has, then that history of being successful, that reinforcement, could be why they keep searching, even when they can't see the object.
See, that makes the link between behavior and environment so much clearer. No more guessing games about what's going on in someone's head.
Exactly. And that's what's so powerful about the functional approach. It gives us a really practical way to understand behavior and change it. And speaking of different types of behavior,
the research lays out these two basic categories, respondent and operant behavior.
Respondent, that's like those automatic reflexes, right? The example they use is pupils constricting in response to light.
Exactly. These are involuntary. They're triggered by specific things in the environment. You don't have to learn to constrict your pupils when it's bright. It just happens.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about operant behavior then?
Operant behaviors are influenced by what happens after them, the consequences. They're not automatic. They're shaped by our experiences. Like when a child learns to say please to get a cookie.
Oh, right. They do that because they've learned it gets them that tasty reward.
You got it.
So respondent is all about the stuff that comes before the behavior, and operant is all about what comes after.
You're exactly right.
Okay, I think I'm getting this.
It's like this. Imagine you accidentally touch a hot stove. That immediate reaction, pulling your hand back, that's respondent behavior.
A reflex. Ouch.
But then you learn from that, don't you? You learn to avoid touching hot stoves in the future. Makes sense.
That avoidance, that's operant behavior, shaped by the negative reinforcement of not getting burned again.
It's amazing to think about how both of these types of learning are happening, all the time.
Yeah.
Shaping how we act.
It really is. And it gets even more interesting because the research brings up this idea of a response class.
Oh, what class?
A response class. It's like a group of behaviors that might look totally different, but they're all doing the same job. They have the same function.
So different tools for the same job.
Exactly. Like, think about how many different ways you could try to convince someone of something. You could use logic and facts.
Right.
You could appeal to their emotions. You could even try humor. All these different ways of acting, but the goal is the same, to persuade them.
That's a really helpful way to look at it. And I'm guessing that understanding these functions, that's a big part of actually changing behavior, right?
Yeah. You're right on the money.
If we can figure out what's reinforcing a behavior, we can tweak the environment to make something else more likely to happen.
Exactly. That's core ABA. Using what we know about behavior to help people learn new skills, decrease those challenging behaviors. It's about seeing the function and then working with the environment to create change.
Okay, I'm with you. Now, this whole environment thing, it seems like ABA has a pretty broad definition of what that actually means, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just the physical stuff around us.
Right. It's anything that can influence behavior inside or outside the person.
So even things happening inside our bodies, if I have a stomach ache or I'm feeling super anxious, that's part of the environment too.
Exactly.
A stomach ache can be just as powerful as a noisy room when it comes to influencing how I act.
Absolutely. Both of those things could trigger certain behaviors, like looking for relief or trying to escape the situation.
Wow, that's interesting. It really shows how connected our inner world and the outside world are,
Mm,
at least in terms of how they shape what we do.
yeah. And that connection, that's at the heart of how ABA understands the relationship between behavior and the environment. You really can't separate them.
You can't have one without the other. They're constantly playing off each other.
Right.
And the research digs even deeper into this. It talks about how stimuli actually acquire the power to influence behavior. It brings up this concept of stimulus functions, which sounds pretty key to understanding how we learn.
It's like the secret sauce of behavior change.
Yeah.
There are two main processes at work here: respondent conditioning and operant conditioning.
Okay, respondent conditioning. That's probably easier to grasp. It involves those automatic reflexes, like Pavlov and his dogs.
Exactly.
You pair a neutral stimulus with something that automatically triggers a response, like the bell with the food. And eventually, the bell alone makes the dog drool.
You got it. And this type of conditioning is happening all the time, all around us.
I bet.
Think about advertising jingles.
Oh, yeah.
They're designed to make you feel good, happy, excited, and they pair those feelings with the product. So even though the jingle was meaningless at first, now it can trigger those feelings and make you want that product.
So we're being conditioned left and right without even knowing it. But operant conditioning seems a bit more, well, straightforward.
Yeah. It's about how consequences shape our actions.
Mm.
Good outcome, more likely to do it again. Bad outcome, probably not going to repeat that.
It's like learning from trial and error.
Exactly.
The research mentions some important stimulus functions within operant conditioning, things like reinforcement and, what were they called? Discriminative stimuli, I think.
Yeah, those are the big ones.
So reinforcement, that's all about increasing behavior, making it more likely to happen again.
Right. And there are two types of reinforcement: positive and negative. Positive reinforcement is when something is added after a behavior, and that makes the behavior happen more, like getting a sticker on your homework for a job, well done.
Yeah, that little sticker makes you feel good, so you're more likely to put in the effort next time. Then there's negative reinforcement, where something is taken away to increase a behavior.
Yeah.
Like the example they gave, taking an aspirin to get rid of a headache.
Perfect example. You take that aspirin to escape the pain. And that feeling of relief, that reinforces the behavior of taking aspirin the next time you have a headache.
Makes sense. Negative reinforcement is kind of tricky because we think of negative as bad. Yeah. But here it just means taking something away.
Yeah, a lot of people get tripped up by that.
It's not about punishment. It's about getting away from something unpleasant.
Exactly.
And boy, that can be powerful. Think about all the things we do just to avoid feeling uncomfortable or dealing with something we don't like. Putting on a coat when it's cold, using an umbrella when it's raining.
Exactly.
Studying for a test so we don't get a bad grade. It's all negative reinforcement in action.
It really is. We're motivated by more than just seeking out pleasure. We also want to get away from pain or discomfort.
Makes sense. So what about those discriminative stimuli? They're like signals that a certain behavior will probably lead to reinforcement, right?
Right on. Think about a green traffic light. That green light tells you it's safe to go. And if you go, you're reinforced by getting to your destination.
Or a sale sign at your favorite store. It's like a big flashing arrow saying, now's the time to buy.
Exactly.
Because you're more likely to get a good deal, that reinforcement, if you buy things when they're on sale.
Exactly. So these stimuli, they gain that special power, that discriminative function, because they reliably predict when reinforcement's available.
It's like they're saying, hey, do this thing now and you'll probably get what you want.
Absolutely. And this back and forth between reinforcement and those signals, that's how we learn to navigate the world, make good choices. Well, good in terms of what works for us.
It's fascinating, this whole system of cues and consequences and learning. It all seems so intricate. The cool thing about ABA is that we can actually use it to help with real-life challenges. Speaking of which, our research goes into how ABA is used to understand and deal with those challenging behaviors, especially in people with developmental disabilities.
And this is where functional analysis really shines. It's like our detective work to figure out the why behind behaviors that might seem confusing or even harmful.
Right. And the source material actually highlights this landmark study by Iwata and colleagues that looked at self-injurious behavior, or SIB, in kids with developmental disabilities.
Right, right. And that study was a total game changer because it showed that SIB even though it might look the same on the surface, could be serving different purposes for different kids.
So we can't just look at the behavior itself. We have to understand the reason behind it,
Exactly.
why they're doing it.
Exactly. So some kids in that study, they engaged instead to get attention from adults.
Makes sense.
But for others, it was a way to escape demands, like if a task was too hard or they just didn't want to do it.
Wow, so the exact same behavior, but totally different motivations.
And there were even some kids for whom the SIB seemed to be reinforcing all by itself, like it provided some kind of sensory input they liked.
So without knowing the why, any attempt to stop that behavior is just a guess.
It is.
You're just throwing things at the wall and hoping something sticks. And that's where functional analysis comes in. It helps us really zero in on those specific environmental triggers so we can create an intervention that actually works.
Instead of using the same approach for everyone, we're tailoring it to the individual because everyone's different.
It's about understanding the why and using that to make real positive changes.
That's the goal.
It's a powerful reminder that even behaviors that seem really confusing or troubling, they often have a logical explanation when you look at them through the lens of ABA.
Absolutely. And that understanding, that opens up so many doors to provide support, to help individuals learn better ways to communicate their needs, to navigate the world.
Well, this deep dive has been incredible already, but we've got much more to uncover.
Yes.
Our source material talks about a specific research design that ABA uses all the time.
Oh, yeah.
The ABAB reversal design.
It's a classic.
What is that all about?
Well, it's all about systematically changing things in the environment
Okay.
and then carefully watching how those changes affect behavior.
So it's a controlled experiment.
Exactly. It's like turning a light switch on and off.
Oh.
We introduce the intervention, that's our B phase.
Oh.
We watch what happens, then we
Right.
take the intervention away, go back to baseline, that's A.
Back to how things were before.
Exactly.
And if the behavior goes back to how it was before the intervention,
Right.
then that tells us the intervention was probably the thing that caused the change.
Exactly. But then, just to be extra sure, we flip the switch again.
We do.
Yeah, we reintroduce the intervention, go back to B.
Back to the intervention.
And if the behavior changes again,
In the same way.
exactly the same way as before,
Then we can be even more sure that the intervention was the thing that made the difference,
that's the idea.
not just some random coincidence or something.
Exactly. ABAB helps us rule out other explanations and really strengthens our confidence that what we're seeing is a real cause and effect relationship.
I like it. It's elegant.
It is.
I remember reading this really fascinating example of the ABAB design in action.
Oh, yeah.
It was about this student. They called him Bob.
Okay.
And Bob kept reversing digits when he was doing addition problems.
Ah,
So like instead of writing 12 for 5 plus 7, he would write 21.
classic digit reversal.
It turned out that the teacher's attempts to help Bob were actually making the problem worse.
Oh, how so?
It seems counterintuitive,
It does.
but the research explained that whenever Bob reversed a digit, the teacher would give him extra help,
Uh-huh.
like walk him through the steps to get to the right answer.
Right. And her intentions were good.
Oh, totally. She was just trying to help,
Of course.
but she was accidentally rewarding the very thing she was trying to stop.
Because sometimes attention, even if it's in the form of correction, can be a powerful reinforcer.
Especially for kids.
Especially for kids.
So the researchers, they used the ABAB design to test their theory,
Okay.
that it was the teacher's attention that was keeping those digit reversals going.
Interesting.
So during the baseline phases, the A phases,
Yeah.
the teacher kept doing what she normally did, giving extra help for those reversed digits.
Uh-huh.
But then in the intervention phase, the B phase,
Right.
the teacher stopped giving extra help for reversals completely.
Wow, cold turkey.
And she only praised Bob when he got the answers right.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, so what happened?
What happened?
The results were amazing.
Really?
When those digit reversals didn't get that extra attention anymore, they basically disappeared.
Wow.
But then when they went back to the teacher's usual way, back to A,
Mm-hmm.
the digit reversals started creeping back up.
Oh, no.
It was pretty clear that the teacher's attention was a big part of the problem.
It was the fuel for the fire.
But to be absolutely sure, the researchers flipped that switch one more time.
Back to B.
Yep, back to the intervention.
Okay.
And again, those digit reversals plummeted when the teacher only focused on praising Bob for getting things right.
Amazing.
The ABAB design showed, without a doubt, the power of changing how reinforcement works.
It really does highlight how important it is to figure out what's actually maintaining a behavior.
Yeah, especially when what we're trying isn't working.
It's such a good lesson for all of us, not just people who work in ABA.
Absolutely.
Sometimes our best intentions,
Yeah.
the things we think are going to help,
Right.
can actually have the opposite effect.
We're making things worse without realizing it.
Exactly, and by using a systematic approach.
Like ABAB.
Yes, like ABAB.
We can really see what's influencing behavior and then make changes that are actually helpful.
It takes the guesswork out of it.
Now, the source material does point out that ABAB isn't perfect.
Right.
It has some limitations.
Of course, nothing's perfect.
Like some behaviors, once they're learned, they might not go back to baseline even when we take the intervention away.
Yeah, think about learning to read.
Okay.
Once you've learned to read, you're not suddenly going to forget how to do it just because someone stops praising you for reading.
Right.
That skill, it's maintained by so many things.
Access to information, enjoyment.
Exactly. It's just part of your life now.
The source material also mentions some ethical concerns.
Yeah.
Especially when we're dealing with behaviors that could be harmful if they come back during that baseline phase.
Right. You'd never want to put someone at risk just to prove a point.
Exactly. We always have to put the person's well-being first.
Absolutely.
So if taking away an intervention could be dangerous, then we can't ethically use ABB in that situation.
Makes sense.
We have to weigh the potential benefits of the research against the potential risks.
It's all about finding that balance.
So while the ABAB design is really useful for showing how changing the environment can change behavior,
Yeah.
it's not always the right tool.
Right.
We have to be thoughtful
Think it through.
and consider the ethics of the situation.
Absolutely.
But even with its limitations, ABAB has really changed how we understand behavior.
It has.
It shows us that behavior isn't random or mysterious.
There are patterns.
It follows predictable patterns.
Exactly.
And when we understand those patterns,
Yeah.
we can make a real difference in people's lives.
I completely agree.
And speaking of scientific breakthroughs,
Yeah.
it turns out those ABA research designs,
Uh-huh.
especially the ones that establish those stable baselines we were talking about,
Yeah, those are so important.
they've been really helpful in the field of behavioral neuroscience.
Oh, that's interesting.
When you think about it, it makes sense.
How so?
Well, if we can create a predictable pattern of behavior under controlled conditions,
Yeah.
then we can introduce a drug
Uh-huh.
and see how that drug changes things.
It's like a before and after picture.
Exactly.
I like that.
And the source material gives some really cool examples of how this has been used to study the effects of all kinds of drugs.
Oh, like what?
Amphetamine,
Okay.
morphine,
Interesting.
even tranquilizers.
Wow.
By establishing that stable baseline of behavior,
Yeah.
researchers can see how different doses of a drug change things.
That's fascinating.
Gives us clues about how those drugs work.
It really shows how these different levels of analysis are all connected.
Yeah,
We can't truly understand behavior without looking at the biology.
and vice versa, right?
Right. Understanding how drugs change behavior can tell us about how the brain works.
How we learn, how we're motivated, even addiction.
It's all connected.
So ABA isn't just about therapy.
No.
It's a powerful tool for understanding behavior on all these different levels.
I love that.
And just when I thought it couldn't get any more fascinating,
What?
the source material takes us on a little detour into the world of perception.
Oh, this is where things get really trippy.
I know. We tend to think of perception as this passive thing,
Yeah, like we're just cameras.
taking in the world around us.
Right, but ABA says, hold on a minute.
It's not that simple.
Not at all.
Perception is actually a form of behavior,
It is.
and it's shaped by our experiences and the situation we're in.
Our history matters.
So it's not that we're just seeing the world.
Right.
We're actively interacting with it.
We are.
And that interaction is influenced by everything we've learned
Exactly.
and what's happening around us right now.
The context is key.
This idea that perception is a behavior is pretty profound.
It is.
It means what we perceive isn't necessarily what's actually out there.
Right.
It's colored by our motivations,
Yeah.
our expectations, and all those past experiences we were just talking about.
It's all mixed in.
They give this great example.
What's that?
Imagine someone who's always been rewarded for finding four-leaf clovers. They're going to be more likely to see four-leaf clovers,
Uh-huh.
even in patterns that are kind of ambiguous
Right.
because their brain is looking for them,
It's prioritizing that information because it's been meaningful in the past.
even if it means missing other things that might be there.
Exactly.
So it really challenges this idea that we're just passive observers.
Yeah.
Our brains are actively creating our experience based on what's been important to us.
It's amazing and kind of humbling.
It is. It really makes the study behavior even more interesting.
More complex, too. Well, before we wrap up, The source material takes us into this area that might feel kind of familiar.
Oh,
How we can actually apply ABA to everyday decision-making,
interesting.
especially when we're faced with uncertainty.
I like it.
It talks about something called signal detection theory.
Okay, that sounds a little intimidating.
It does sound complex, but the idea is actually pretty simple.
Okay.
Signal detection theory is all about how we make decisions when things aren't perfectly clear.
Right, because life is messy.
Exactly. It's about navigating a world where there's a lot of noise obscuring the important information.
That makes sense. We're bombarded with information all the time.
We are.
It's not always easy to figure out what really matters.
You got it.
Give me an example.
Sure. Think about driving in fog.
Okay, can't see much.
Right. You have to be super careful, watching for those little hints that might mean danger.
Like what?
Like faint brake lights, blur road markings, things like that. But there's also a lot of visual noise from the fog itself.
Yeah, it makes it harder to see clearly.
Exactly. So it's not just about whether a signal is there or not.
Okay.
It's about whether we can actually detect it.
Amidst all the chaos.
Amidst all the chaos. Right. And the stakes are pretty high in that situation.
For sure. One wrong move and...
Exactly. Bad things can happen.
So how do we make the right call?
Well, if you're too cautious and slam on the brakes every time you see a flicker of light,
Yeah.
you could cause an accident.
Right, but if you just ignore everything,
Yeah.
that's not safe either.
Exactly. It's a balancing act.
Weighing the risks and benefits.
Exactly. We have to weigh the costs and benefits of different choices based on how sure we are about the information we're getting.
And that's where ABA comes in.
That's where ABA can really help us.
Okay, how?
Well, ABA teaches us that our perceptions are influenced by a lot of things.
Right, we talked about that.
Our past experiences, our motivations, the context, all of that.
It's not just the information itself.
It's how we interpret it.
So ABA helps us become more aware of our own biases.
Exactly.
We can start to see the noise that's clouding our judgment.
And be more mindful of the consequences of our choices.
It's like having this mental toolkit for navigating a really complicated world.
I like that, a mental toolkit.
And the best part is,
What?
we can apply these principles to pretty much any area of life.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether it's creating a space that helps us build good habits.
Yes.
Or thinking about how we communicate with other people.
Right.
Or even just being more aware of those biases that might be shaping what we see.
It's about taking control.
ABA gives us a way to make positive changes.
I love that.
It's about understanding of the science of behavior.
Yeah.
And then using that to create a life that's more fulfilling and meaningful.
That's what it's all about. It's been a pleasure exploring all of this with you.
Likewise. And learners, remember, this journey of understanding behavior, it never really ends.
There's always more to learn.
But ABA gives us these incredibly valuable insights.
We're into ourselves.
Into the world around us.
Into how everything works.
Keep those brains engaged, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the amazing world of behavior.